The wind, a cold, indifferent breath, whispered secrets through the ancient pines, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something far more primal. Sergeant Elias Vance, a man whose reputation for precision was etched into the very fabric of his being, felt it first in the gooseflesh, crawling up his neck, then in the subtle tightening of his jaw. His fingers, calloused from years of gripping cold steel, instinctively brushed against the familiar coldness of his rifle's stock. He had faced insurgents in crumbling desert towns, navigated the silent, deadly jungles of forgotten nations, and stared down the barrel of fate more times than he cared to count. Yet, standing here, deep within the emerald labyrinth of the Pacific Northwest, a chilling premonition gripped him, a sensation unlike the fear of mortal combat. This was an adversary he hadn't trained for, an encounter that would shatter the bedrock of his understanding. Elias Vance was a name synonymous with unwavering dedication and lethal accuracy in the Marine Corps. A decorated sniper, he commanded respect not just for his kill count, but for the almost spiritual connection he seemed to forge with his weapon and his objective. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. A snapped twig, a disturbed bird's nest, the minute shift in wind direction. All were data points, processed with lightning speed by a mind honed for survival. After 2 decades of service, the uniform had come off, but the soldier remained. The transition to civilian life had been less a return and more a recalibration. He sought not the clamor of cities, nor the cheap thrills of fleeting distractions, but the raw, untamed embrace of the wilderness. He came to these remote mountains with a purpose that even he couldn't fully articulate. Perhaps it was to find a new mission, to outrun the echoes of distant gunshots, or simply to feel the earth solid beneath his boots once more. His solitary expeditions were legendary among the few cabin dwellers scattered sparsely across the region. Elias moved through the forest like a ghost, his pack a well-organized extension of his body, his senses perpetually on high alert. He was a creature of habit and discipline, rising before dawn, moving with the sun, and meticulously documenting every observation in his worn leather journal. The silence of the forest was his sanctuary, the rhythm of nature his forgotten melody. Until now. It began subtly, as all profound disruptions often do. A broken branch, too high for a deer, too thick for a bear, lay across a game trail he knew intimately. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible musky odor, an earthy pungency that reminded him of neither animal nor human, but lingered on the crisp morning air like an unwelcome thought. Elias paused, his internal sensors whirring. He dropped to a knee, his gloved fingers sifting through the damp soil. There it was, a print, massive, deeper than any bear, wider than any human, faint, pressed into the mossy ground just at the edge of his vision. He traced its outline, his brow furrowing. This wasn't a hoax, this wasn't a misidentification. This was something else. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Every fiber of Elias's being screamed for caution. His military training, designed to dissect threats and neutralize them, was now encountering a blank slate. There was no enemy profile, no tactical doctrine for this. Yet the instinct was undeniable, visceral. He was being watched. A shiver, not of cold, but of primal recognition, skittered down his spine. The forest, which just moments ago had felt like a familiar friend, now seemed to hold its breath, its ancient trees concealing silent eyes. This wasn't just a tracking exercise. This was a confrontation with the unknown. His purpose, once vague, solidified in that instant. He would find out what left those prints, he would understand the ominous silence that now permeated his sanctuary. The hunter had become the hunted, or perhaps was about to become the student. The wilderness had presented its ultimate challenge, and Sergeant Elias Vance, accustomed to facing the impossible, would not back down. This journey into the heart of the enigma was just beginning. If you're as captivated by the untold mysteries of our world, by those moments where reality frays at the edges, make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss what Elias discovers next. Elias moved with the silent grace of a predator, each step a testament to years of rigorous training and countless hours spent observing the nuanced language of the wild. The unusual prints, larger and more distinct than any bear he'd ever tracked, led him deeper into the untouched heart of the Olympic National Forest. His initial curiosity, piqued by the sheer anomaly of the tracks, slowly began to curdle into a growing unease. These weren't merely large animal tracks. There was a peculiar gait, an almost bipedal rhythm to them that defied conventional zoology. He noticed snapped branches, not broken by the force of wind or the weight of a falling tree, but angled in a way that suggested immense strength, applied deliberately, as if clearing a path or perhaps marking territory. The forest floor, typically a tapestry of disturbed leaves and scattered debris, seemed oddly quiet in certain areas. The usual chatter of squirrels and rustle of small game conspicuously absent. This disruption of typical animal patterns was a red flag to Elias. Animals instinctively flee or fall silent in the presence of a dominant unknown force. Then came the scent, a musky, earthy aroma, unlike anything he could place. It wasn't the sharp, acrid smell of a predator's urine, nor the sweet decay of a carcass. It was heavy, primal, and incredibly potent, clinging to the damp air and evoking an almost ancestral apprehension within him. Elias, ever the meticulous observer, meticulously documented every detail. The precise measurements of the footprints, the height at which branches were broken, the direction of travel, the subtle shifts in the forest's ambient sounds. He wasn't just tracking an animal now. He was piecing together the puzzle of an unknown entity. His military discipline kicked in, transforming what began as an exploratory hike into a high-stakes reconnaissance mission. He established a discreet, long-term observation post, high on a ridge overlooking a natural spring, a likely watering hole for any large creature. His camouflage was impeccable, his movements fluid and undetectable, his patience boundless. He deployed an array of miniaturized, motion-activated cameras and sound recorders, setting a perimeter that would alert him to anything approaching his hidden sanctuary. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light and the rhythmic symphony of the forest. Then, on the fourth evening, as dusk was painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias caught a fleeting glimpse. Through the dense screen of ancient firs and dripping moss, a colossal figure moved. It was massive, undeniably ape-like, a silhouette against the fading light, its sheer bulk dwarfing the surrounding foliage. It moved with a powerful, almost fluid motion that belied its immense size. It was only for a second, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but it was enough. The legendary Bigfoot, the creature's raw power, was palpable even from that distance, a silent assertion of dominance over its domain. Elias felt a jolt, not of fear, but of profound professional assessment. This was no ordinary animal. Its size, its apparent intelligence in navigating such treacherous terrain, its elusiveness, all pointed to an apex being. His initial thought, honed by years of threat assessment, was to categorize it as a potential, albeit unknown, threat. His hand instinctively went to the custom-made hunting rifle laid beside him, its cold steel a familiar comfort. However, Elias, always one to gather maximum intelligence before acting, resisted the urge to engage. He had always been taught that knowledge was power, and at this point, his knowledge was severely lacking. He saw the creature not as a monster, but as a biological enigma, a piece of the world's puzzle waiting to be understood. He resolved to observe from a distance, to document its movements and habits, to learn its patterns. He spent weeks becoming a ghost in the forest, a silent shadow tracking a phantom. He noted its feeding habits, primarily foraging for berries, roots, and fungi, with occasional signs of small game consumption. He mapped its patrol routes, its preferred resting spots, its incredible ability to melt into the landscape. He attempted to predict its patterns, employing his advanced tracking skills to remain entirely undetected. The creature, for its part, seemed utterly oblivious to his presence, a testament to Elias's unparalleled stealth. The question of reporting his findings gnawed at him. Such a discovery would redefine zoology, send shockwaves through the scientific community. But he also understood the skepticism, the ridicule, the likely disbelief that would meet his claims. A decorated Marine sniper claiming to have found Bigfoot, alone in the wilderness, without concrete proof beyond his word and some blurry, long-distance footage. He also considered the implications for the creature itself. What would happen if its existence was confirmed? Hunters, scientists, eager entrepreneurs, all would descend upon this pristine wilderness, potentially destroying the very thing he was trying to understand. Elias, for now, chose observation over disclosure, opting to be the lone witness to an extraordinary secret, a silent sentinel guarding the unknown. He continued his meticulous watch, his heart pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery and the immense weight of the secret he now carried. A secret that transcended mere military missions and delved into the very core of natural mystery. The subtle shifts began almost imperceptibly, a whisper in the wind that only Elias, with his honed senses, could truly detect. What started as diligent, covert observation slowly morphed into a tense, unspoken confrontation. The creature, the magnificent Sasquatch, was no longer merely a subject of study. It had become aware. Elias sensed it in the way the local wildlife grew eerily silent, not with the usual caution provoked by his own presence, but with a deeper, more primal stillness, as if acknowledging a superior force. The forest, once a vast canvas for his meticulous tracking, now felt like a stage where he was both player and prey. He first noticed it when he returned to his hidden camp. Nothing was overtly disturbed, no signs of forced entry or ransacking. Yet, the small cairn of stones he'd used to mark his water cache was rearranged. A single flat river stone placed precisely atop the others. It was too deliberate to be an animal, too neat to be mere chance. His heart pounded a disquieting rhythm against his ribs. This was a message, subtle but unmistakable. The creature knew. It wasn't just aware of his location. It was acknowledging his presence, perhaps even toying with him. The game intensified. Elias, ever the strategist, attempted to adapt. He changed his observation posts daily, never staying in one spot for too long, employing advanced counter-tracking techniques he'd learned in arid deserts and dense jungles, methods designed to evade the most relentless human pursuers. But the Sasquatch was different. Its movements were fluid, ghost-like, leaving trails that would occasionally surface, then vanish without a trace, confounding even his unparalleled expertise. He would find large, snapped branches just outside the periphery of his sight, deliberately broken but with no discernible pattern, as if to remind him of its effortless power. Or he would hear a low, guttural chuff, not a roar of aggression, but a sound of presence, emanating from just beyond his vision, always close enough to send a shiver down his spine. It was a constant, unnerving reminder that he was being watched, monitored, assessed. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of fruitless tracking, Elias returned to find his fire pit, carefully extinguished and covered, subtly uncovered. A single, enormous footprint was pressed into the soft earth beside it, fresh and deep, as if the creature had stood there, watching him approach before melting back into the shadows. Elias froze, rifle raised, scanning the dense tree line. The air was thick with tension, a primal hum that resonated deep within his bones. He knew he was being evaluated, his intentions weighed, his resolve tested. This wasn't just a wild animal. This was an intelligent entity, playing a psychological game that tapped into his deepest fears and instincts. The psychological toll began to mount. Elias, a man forged in the crucible of war, accustomed to clear objectives and identifiable enemies, found himself battling an adversary that defied all his training. In the military, threats were quantifiable: enemy combatants, IEDs, tactical positions. Here, the threat was amorphous, intelligent, and utterly unknowable. What were its motives? Was it hostile, curious, or simply asserting dominance over its territory? The ambiguity gnawed at him, eroding the bedrock of his professional certainty. Sleep became a luxury, fitful and punctuated by sudden awakenings, his senses hyper-alert to every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The constant vigilance was exhausting, a relentless grind on his psyche. He started questioning his own sanity. Was he projecting human intelligence onto a mere beast? Or was he witnessing something so fundamentally outside the realm of accepted science that his mind struggled to process it? The creature's subtle manipulations, its uncanny ability to anticipate his movements and retaliate with these silent, profound gestures, suggested an intellect far beyond that of any known animal. Elias had witnessed the cunning of insurgents, the strategic brilliance of opposing forces. But this was different. This was an ancient, intuitive intelligence, a mind rooted in the primal wisdom of the forest itself. His military training, which had once been his greatest strength, now felt like a cage, limiting his understanding. He was trained to neutralize threats, to dominate, to conquer. But how could you neutralize an entity that appeared to read your thoughts, that communicated through rearranged stones and whispered guttural warnings in the impenetrable darkness? How could you dominate a being that seemed to embody the very spirit of the wilderness, a force of nature itself? The rigid protocols of combat dissolved in the face of this enigma, leaving Elias adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He was no longer the hunter. He was a participant in a bewildering, dangerous dance, a dance orchestrated by an unseen, ancient hand. The lines blurred between predator and prey, observer and observed, and Elias, the disciplined marine sniper, found himself in uncharted territory, where every rustle could be a sign, every silence a message, and every moment fraught with an unknown purpose, determined by the behemoth of the forest. The relentless mental siege, the constant battle against the unknown, finally reached its breaking point. Elias, driven by a deep-seated need for resolution and clarity, decided to force the issue. He had exhausted every observational tactic, every discrete tracking method, and yet the creature remained an elusive, intelligent shadow. The psychological warfare had to end one way or another. With a grim resolve that hardened his features, he chose his ambush point with the meticulous precision of a predator. It was a vantage overlooking a small, secluded clearing where he had observed the Bigfoot on several occasions, often pausing briefly, seemingly contemplating the ancient trees. He positioned himself high in a towering fir, camouflaged perfectly, his breathing slow and controlled, his heart a steady drumbeat against his ribs. His sniper rifle, a precision instrument of lethal intent, was cradled against his shoulder, its scope a cold, unblinking eye trained on the center of the clearing. Hours stretched into an eternity. The forest hummed with its usual symphony of chirps and rustles, but to Elias every sound was amplified, every shadow a potential movement. He reviewed his tactical plan, the engagement parameters, the clear shot he had envisioned countless times. This was it, the moment of truth. He would put an end to the ambiguity, to the unsettling game. He aimed for center mass, a clean, swift kill that would neutralize the threat, definitively confirm its existence, and perhaps finally bring peace to his tormented mind. He was a Marine, trained to eliminate targets, and this creature, whatever it was, had undeniably become one. He tightened his grip, his finger resting lightly on the trigger, the cold metal a familiar reassurance. Then a sudden, powerful stillness descended upon the clearing. The birds quieted. The wind seemed to hold its breath. A massive, dark shape emerged from the dense growth at the far end, moving with an eerie, almost silent grace. It was the Bigfoot, unmistakable in its immense size and powerful bipedal form. It stepped into the clearing, its shaggy fur a mosaic of earthy tones, its massive shoulders hunched, its head turning slowly, deliberately, as if sensing the very air. Elias's breath hitched, but his training kicked in, overriding the primal awe. His crosshairs settled, unwavering, just above its heart. He began the slow, deliberate squeeze of the trigger, the muscle memory of countless practice shots guiding his hand. But just as the firing pin was about to strike, a sound erupted from the creature, a complex, resonant sequence that tore through the pre-dawn stillness. It wasn't a roar of aggression, nor the simple growl of an animal. It was a series of guttural tones, sharp clicks, deep rumbles, and elongated moans, woven together in a pattern Elias had never encountered. It spoke of ancient things, of deep sorrow, of something profoundly articulate, yet utterly alien. It was too intricate, too nuanced to be mere animalistic vocalization. It was speech, distorted and foreign, yet undeniably structured, carrying a weight of meaning that resonated far beyond its unfamiliar phonetics. The sounds vibrated through the very ground, through Elias's body, shaking him to his core. His finger froze on the trigger. The unexpected vocalization caused a jolt, a sudden, visceral hesitation that defied every ounce of his training. His mind, conditioned for decisive action, for the swift elimination of threats, suddenly found itself grappling with an entirely new paradigm. The sound wasn't a challenge, nor a warning in the conventional sense. It was something else entirely, something that spoke of intelligence, of communication, a desperate attempt to convey a message in a language he couldn't understand. The pure, unadulterated shock of it momentarily paralyzed him. He had anticipated a fight, a chase, a silent target. He had not anticipated a plea, or a narrative, or whatever profound utterance this creature was attempting. His weapon, that extension of his will and his training, felt impossibly heavy. He eased off the trigger, his finger trembling slightly. His years as a sniper had ingrained in him the axiom of never hesitating, of executing the mission without doubt. Yet, here he was, doubt blossoming within him like a toxic flower. He lowered the barrel of his rifle a fraction, not intentionally, but as an involuntary reaction to the profound disquiet that had seized him. The Bigfoot, still standing in the clearing, its massive form now bathed in the first tentative rays of dawn, continued its series of complex sounds, its head tilted slightly, its massive eyes fixed not on the surrounding forest but, Elias suddenly realized with a chilling certainty, directly on him. The creature knew he was there, had known all along, and this wasn't a random vocalization. This was directed. This was an address. This was a deliberate attempt to engage, to communicate, to break the primal barrier between them. And Elias, the hardened Marine sniper, had, against all odds, lowered his weapon. The air, thick with unspoken tension, shimmered with an almost palpable energy, as the colossal figure, previously cloaked in the deceptive embrace of the forest's deep shadows, now took a deliberate step forward. Elias, his breath held captive in his lungs, watched as the Bigfoot emerged further into the clearing, its massive form no longer a fleeting glimpse, but a stark, undeniable presence under the filtered sunlight. This was no fleeting illusion, no trick of light and shadow, but a creature of immense power and undeniable physical reality. Its shaggy, dark fur seemed to absorb the light, making its contours at once distinct and mysteriously undefined. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing the surrounding pines, an ancient sentinel brought to life. Elias found his finger had completely left the trigger guard, his weapon still lowered, but now less out of indecision and more from a sudden, overwhelming sense of awe. Then it spoke again. This time, the vocalizations were different. Gone was the initial, startling guttural burst, replaced by a series of sounds that held a discernible rhythm, a nuanced pattern that resonated with an almost musical quality. It wasn't human speech, not in any recognizable tongue, but neither was it the random roar of a beast. There was inflection, a rising and falling pitch, a complexity that hinted at internal thought, at structure, at meaning. The sounds seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but deep within Elias's chest, a primordial hum that stirred something ancient within his own DNA. The creature punctuated its vocalizations with slow, deliberate gestures. A massive, clawed hand would rise, sweep across the expanse of the clearing, then settle, its gaze fixed on Elias with an intensity that pierced through his military-hardened facade. Against every shred of his disciplined training, every instinct that screamed threat, Elias found himself not aiming for a kill shot, but straining to understand. He listened intently, his sniper's focus now redirected from targeting to decoding. His eyes darted between the creature's large, intelligent eyes and its deliberate hand movements. He observed the subtle shifts in its posture, the way its head tilted, the almost human-like expressions that flitted across its surprisingly articulate face. He was searching for a Rosetta Stone in the wilderness, a key to unlock this bizarre, unexpected conversation. There was no fear now, only an intense, almost desperate curiosity. He felt an inexplicable pull, a connection forming in the most unlikely of circumstances. A decorated Marine sniper and a legendary cryptid, locked in a silent dialogue, mediated by unintelligible sounds and profound gestures. He sensed intelligent intent, a purpose behind every movement, every sound. This was not a territorial display, it was an attempt at communication. Slowly, painstakingly, as if piecing together fragments of an impossibly intricate puzzle, Elias began to perceive elements of a narrative woven into the creature's strange language. The sweeping gestures of its hand seemed to indicate vast stretches of time, of forests untouched, of landscapes pristine and unmarred. Its deep, reverberating hums evoked a sense of ancient lineage, of generations rooted deeply in this very land, a continuity that predated human memory. The creature's eyes, filled with an unreadable depth, would occasionally glance towards the distant human settlements, then back to Elias, and then to the untouched expanse of the woods around them. Through these subtle yet powerful cues, Elias began to construct a story in his mind, a narrative that transcended words. He perceived themes of coexistence, of a delicate balance maintained for eons. The creature seemed to be recounting a history, not of conflict, but of shared space, of mutual respect between species, a natural order that humanity had, perhaps unwittingly, begun to disrupt. There was an undercurrent of something deeper, profound sense of loss woven into the creature's vocalizations, almost like a mourning song for what once was. And then, undeniably, a palpable fear. Not a fear for its own life, but a deep-seated apprehension, a primal dread of human encroachment. The creature's large, mournful eyes seemed to hold the weight of centuries of observation, of watching the relentless advance of humanity, the slow but inexorable destruction of its world. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This wasn't just a creature. It was a living chronicle, a guardian of ancient truths, now desperately trying to impart its wisdom to a species that seemed determined to ignore it. He stood transfixed, no longer a hunter, but a listener, absorbing the silent, profound narrative of the Bigfoot. The creature, perhaps sensing Elias's openness, a subtle shift in his aggressive posture, focused its words with an intensity that transcended mere sound. It was as if the very air vibrated with a profound sadness, a lament that seeped into Elias's bones, bypassing his ears and resonating directly with his soul. The guttural expressions, previously a chaotic symphony, coalesced into a discernible narrative, a tapestry woven from despair and warning. It conveyed a deep, agonizing frustration about humanity's relentless destruction of the natural world, our insatiable appetite for conquest and consumption. Elias felt, rather than heard, images flashing in his mind. Ancient forests falling to the chainsaw's hungry bite, rivers choked with pollutants, mountains scarred by mining operations. He saw, through the creature's eyes, the vibrant tapestry of life unraveling, strand by precious strand, at the hands of thoughtless progress. The Bigfoot's massive head tilted slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture that nonetheless conveyed a world of meaning. It spoke, or rather, it projected, of our relentless expansion, the creeping concrete and steel that devoured wilderness, pushing its kind and countless others to the brink of extinction. There was no anger, not precisely, but an overwhelming weariness, a profound sorrow for what was lost and what continued to be lost. Its communication was like a dirge, a mournful song for a dying world, a world that once thrived in harmony before the dominant species arrived with its insatiable hunger and its terrifying ingenuity for destruction. Elias felt a pang of guilt, a collective shame for his species, for the wars he had fought that, in retrospect, seemed so petty compared to this epic struggle for survival. The creature's unique form of communication, a blend of gesture, vocalization, and an almost telepathic projection of raw emotion and imagery, bypassed Elias's analytical mind and struck directly at his empathy. It articulated, with chilling clarity, a message of warning. The creature spoke of a delicate balance, an intricate web of life sustained for millennia, now teetering on the precipice. It conveyed the ancient wisdom of reciprocity, of taking only what is needed, of respecting the interconnectedness of all living things. Elias saw flashes of communal living, of resourcefulness, of a profound understanding of ecological rhythms that human society had long forgotten, or perhaps never truly possessed. The creature's silent admonition painted a picture of humanity as a rogue element, a cancer in the delicate ecosystem, consuming without thought for replenishment, building without respect for foundation. It spoke of the irreversible consequences of unchecked human ambition, of a future where the echoes of nature's symphony would be replaced by the sterile hum of machinery and the silence of extinction. This wasn't a threat of direct violence, but a prophecy of self-destruction. The creature seemed to warn that humanity, in its arrogance, was carving its own grave, not just for itself, but for everything it touched. It lamented the short-sightedness that prioritized immediate gain over long-term survival, the hubris that believed nature could be conquered, tamed, and exploited indefinitely without repercussion. Elias, who had seen enough of humanity's destructive capabilities on battlefields far from these pristine woods, felt a profound resonance with the creature's lament. The battlefield, with its shattered landscapes and broken bodies, was but a microcosm of the larger war humanity, waged against its own home. Elias's internal conflict raged, his sniper training, his very identity as a protector and a force for order had always been clear-cut. Enemy identified, threat neutralized, but this was no enemy in the traditional sense. This was a sentient being, a guardian, perhaps, of an ancient truth, delivering a message of dire consequence. The creature's words resonated deeply with his own growing disillusionment with aspects of modern society. The consumerism, the incessant noise, the disconnect from the very earth that sustained us. He thought of the endless cycles of conflict he had witnessed, the squandered resources, the political machinations that seemed to lead nowhere, but deeper into chaos. The destruction he had seen in wars began to merge with the ecological destruction the Bigfoot was now communicating, painting a bleak picture of humanity's trajectory. His perception of the Bigfoot shifted dramatically. It was no longer a target, a biological anomaly to be studied or eliminated. It was a messenger, a sentient being with a profound, urgent message that transcended species, a message about survival, about respect, about the very essence of life itself. The primal fear that had initially gripped him dissipated, replaced by a strange mix of awe and profound empathy. He found himself not wanting to harm it, but to understand it, to absorb its pain, its wisdom. The rifle, still clutched in his hands, felt heavy, an artifact of a world that suddenly seemed incredibly small, incredibly misguided. The world of military codes and protocols seemed trivial in the face of this ancient wisdom, this raw, unfiltered truth being poured into his consciousness. He was no longer just Elias Vance, Marine sniper. He was a student, a witness, caught in the crosscurrents of an ancient lament and a desperate warning. The forest, once a mere backdrop to his hunt, became a cathedral of profound revelations, and the creature, a reluctant prophet. The heavy weight in Elias's hands, the cold steel of the rifle, suddenly felt foreign, an unwelcome intrusion in the sacred space this encounter had become. The creature's plaintive sounds, its eloquent gestures, had dismantled every last vestige of his training, every ingrained instinct for threat assessment and neutralization. There was no threat here, only a profound ancient sorrow, and a desperate plea for understanding. His fingers, once poised to deliver a fatal blow, now trembled with a different kind of intensity, a realization that he stood at a precipice of not just his own morality, but perhaps humanity's future. The choice was stark, undeniable. He could not, would not, harm this being. Slowly, deliberately, Elias lowered the rifle. The movement was almost agonizingly slow, a symbolic surrender not just of a weapon, but of an entire worldview. The barrel, which had been tracking the Bigfoot's chest just moments before, now pointed harmlessly at the forest floor. The sound of the metallic stock tapping gently against his leg was loud in the sudden, suspended silence. He let his shoulders slump, a visible release of the immense tension that had coiled within him for days. His gaze, no longer narrowed in a sniper's focus, softened, seeking not a target, but a connection. The wind, which had been whispering through the pines, seemed to hold its breath. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a bridge spanning the chasm of species and experience. The Bigfoot, which had been conveying its desperate message with such intensity, paused its guttural articulations. Its massive dark eyes, surprisingly intelligent and deep, fixed on Elias. There was no triumph in its gaze, no relief, but rather a quiet acknowledgement, a profound recognition of his gesture of peace. It was as if the creature had been waiting for this very moment, for a glimmer of hope in the human heart, a sign that not all was lost. The air around them, previously thick with the weight of threat and warning, now shimmered with a strange, almost palpable, sense of quiet respect. The forest itself seemed to exhale. Its myriad sounds, the distant chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, returning softly, as if rejoining a conversation that had briefly paused. Elias, still holding the rifle loosely, felt an overwhelming sense of humility. He, a trained killer, a man who prided himself on precision and control, had been completely disarmed, not by force but by truth. The creature's message had not been delivered through words he understood, but through an ancient language of shared existence, of ecological interconnectedness, of a fundamental respect for life that humanity seemed to have forgotten. He met the Bigfoot's gaze, unblinking, feeling an unexpected wave of empathy wash over him. This wasn't just an animal, it was a sentinel, a keeper of secrets, a living embodiment of the wilderness itself, wounded and pleading. The Bigfoot watched him for what felt like an eternity, though it might have only been a few heartbeats. Its posture, once assertive in its communication, softened slightly. Its massive shoulders, previously held in a stance of almost defiant sorrow, relaxed. Elias saw in its eyes a complex tapestry of emotions, ancient wisdom, profound sorrow, and perhaps a fleeting, fragile spark of hope. It was a look that conveyed centuries of observation, generations of silent witness to humanity's relentless advance into its sacred spaces. It was the look of a being that understood far more than Elias could ever fathom, a being that carried the weight of the forest in its very essence. Then, with a final, lingering look, a gaze Elias would carry with him for the rest of his days, imprinted on his very soul, the Bigfoot turned. It moved with an almost ethereal grace, its colossal frame melting into the dense foliage as if it were a part of the shadows themselves. There was no crashing through underbrush, no heavy footsteps announcing its departure. It simply disappeared. One moment it was there, a monumental presence filling the clearing with its sorrowful wisdom, and the next, only the rustling leaves and the filtered sunlight remained. It was as if a powerful, ancient spirit had simply withdrawn, leaving Elias alone with the echo of its profound words, ringing in the absolute stillness of the woods. The silence that followed was not empty, but heavy, pregnant with the gravity of the encounter, filled with the reverberations of a truth Elias had never expected to find. He stood there for a long time, the rifle still in his inert hands. The image of those intelligent, sorrowful eyes burned into his memory. The creature's message about humanity's reckless destruction echoing in the profound solitude now surrounding him. The forest, once a hunting ground, was now a cathedral of revelation. And he, an unwitting, unwilling convert, Elias Vance left the wilderness a fundamentally changed man, the weight of the Bigfoot's words settling deep within his soul like ancient stones. He didn't report his encounter, not to any agency, not to any friend, not even to the closest family member. It was a secret too profound, too fragile, to entrust to a world he knew wasn't ready to hear it. The creature's existence, its wisdom, its desperate plea for understanding, had to be preserved, shielded from the very forces it warned against. What good would it do to expose it, only for it to be hunted, exploited, or disbelieved? He understood with crystalline clarity that the creature's secret was not just its own, but a sacred trust now bestowed upon him. He became an unwitting guardian of its message, a solitary sentinel carrying the burden of an inconvenient truth. The experience had fundamentally altered Elias's entire perspective on life, on humanity, and on the natural world around him. The clear-cut lines of right and wrong, of enemy and ally, that had defined his military career, blurred into a complex tapestry of interconnectedness and consequence. The precision he once applied to aiming a rifle, he now applied to understanding the intricate balance of ecosystems, the subtle language of the forest, and the often destructive pathways of human progress. He felt a new, unfamiliar purpose stirring within him, one far removed from the battlefield, yet equally vital. He found himself drawn to quiet contemplation, spending hours in nature, not with a weapon, but with a sketchbook, capturing the ephemeral beauty he now saw with heightened sensitivity. His disillusionment with certain aspects of modern society, which had begun subtly after his military service, deepened into a resolute conviction. He saw the incessant pursuit of material gain, the relentless march of development, the casual disregard for environmental impact, not just as societal failings, but as a direct assault on the delicate balance the Bigfoot had so eloquently described. He found himself advocating for environmental preservation, lending his voice, albeit cautiously, and without revealing his true inspiration, to causes that championed sustainable living and ecological protection. He became a quiet but fervent proponent of rewilding initiatives, of conserving ancient forests, of protecting waterways, always with the creature's mournful gaze and profound words echoing in the chambers of his memory. Elias never revealed the true source of his transformation. How could he? How could he articulate the profound shift that occurred when a legendary creature, cornered and vulnerable, had chosen communication over aggression, wisdom over instinct? He knew he would be met with skepticism, ridicule, or, worse, a frenzy that would inevitably lead to the creature's demise. So he kept his counsel, letting his actions speak louder than any words he could possibly invent to explain his newfound passion. He sought out communities that shared his reverence for the natural world, finding solidarity with those who understood the intrinsic value of wild spaces, even if they couldn't fathom the depths of his personal revelation. The lasting impact of the Bigfoot's words on Elias's soul was profound and indelible. It wasn't just a memory. It was a recalibration of his very being. The creature had not offered him a magical solution or a grand prophecy of hope, but a stark, unvarnished truth, a challenging mirror reflecting humanity's trajectory. It was a call to awaken, to observe, to listen, and to act with greater wisdom and humility. Elias carried that call everywhere, in every decision he made, every conversation he had, every quiet moment spent beneath the ancient trees. He was no longer just Elias Vance, the disciplined Marine sniper. He was a silent steward, a reluctant prophet in his own right, forever bound by the unspoken pact he had made in the heart of the wild. His life became a testament to the idea that some truths are not found through force or conquest, but through open hearts, quiet listening, and the courage to lower one's guard in the face of the unknown. And in that, he found a deeper peace than any medal or commendation could ever offer. If you too have been moved by Elias's extraordinary journey and the profound message from the heart of the wilderness, please take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe is the most critical message humanity needs to hear from nature? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary tales of discovery, mystery, and the untold wonders hidden just beyond the veil of our everyday perception. Who knows what secrets the next story might reveal?